Good evening, my friends. Tonight I want to take you on a journey into a world that may seem glamorous on the surface, but is far more complicated once you step inside. It is not the kind of party you and I might attend today, with music speakers, casual laughter, and the freedom to come and go as we please. Instead, we are traveling back in time to the Victorian era, to a gathering that was less about enjoyment and more about performance, a ritual where appearances mattered more than comfort, and where every guest carried the weight of silent expectations. Imagine yourself standing at the entrance of a grand house somewhere in London during the mid-19th century. The evening air outside is damp and cold, but once you step across the threshold, you are not met with warmth so much as with formality. A butler accepts your calling card with an expression so serious you might think you had just presented him with a royal decree. Behind him, a maid in stiff linen waits to take your cloak, her face set in a mixture of discipline and quiet impatience. Already, before you have even entered the main room, you sense that you are being judged. Your clothing is observed, the way you carry yourself is silently measured, and every detail will be remembered long after you leave. This was the reality of a Victorian party. Beneath the shining chandeliers and the polished marble floors, it was not just about music, conversation, and dance. These gatherings were stages for social performance, carefully constructed events where reputation could be built or broken. For young women, this might be the evening that decided whether a suitable match could be found. For men, it was a chance to display refinement, wit, and ambition. For families, it was proof of their standing in a society that valued hierarchy above all else. To decline an invitation or to fail to attend properly dressed was to risk exclusion, and exclusion in a world so tightly bound by status was close to ruin. Now imagine the pressure of such an evening. In our time, if a party makes us uncomfortable, we can quietly slip out early, scroll through our phones to distract ourselves, or hide in a corner until it ends. In Victorian society, none of those options existed. Once you stepped inside that drawing room, you were committed for the night. The rules of etiquette bound you as tightly as the laces of your corset. To leave early was a breach of duty, and to remain silent or awkward was to risk being invisible. But invisibility was dangerous, for it meant being forgotten, and being forgotten was a social death. Everything in the room seemed designed to increase this tension. The furniture was not only for sitting, but also carried meanings about who belonged where. Some chairs were clearly reserved for important guests, while others were traps for the unwary, seats that might expose you to ridicule or mark you as an outsider. Even the act of moving across the floor carried risks, for too much confidence might draw attention, while too little might make you seem weak. The air itself seemed heavy with expectation, scented with a mix of perfume, candle wax, and the unspoken rules of a society that prized restraint above comfort. Why do these details matter? Because they show us that Victorian parties were not simply about leisure. They were about endurance. Every smile, every word, every bow or curtsy was a kind of test, and the outcome of those tests could shape lives. A well-placed compliment, a conversation with the right person, or even a graceful movement during a dance could open doors to new opportunities. On the other hand, a stumble, a poorly chosen remark, or an unfortunate fashion choice could set tongues wagging and reputations trembling. The stakes were always higher than they appeared. As we walk together through this story, we will see the many layers of such an evening, We will begin with the tense arrival and the awkward moments in the vestibule. We will enter the drawing room, where conversations are more like duels than exchanges, each phrase sharpened and polished to hide as much as it reveals. We will taste the lukewarm punch and guarded glasses of wine, explore the strange parlor games that humiliate as much as they entertain, and watch how fainting, whether real or conveniently staged, became a curious form of social release. We will step into the ballroom, where dances are less graceful art and more chaotic struggles, leaving feet blistered and nerves frayed. And as the night stretches toward midnight, we will discover how even the grandest surprises, like engagements or announcements, carried the same mix of anxiety, gossip, and performance. But more than just a list of customs, this journey is also about the human experience behind them. Because when you strip away the lace, the corsets, and the etiquette manuals, what you find is something timeless. The pressure to belong, the fear of judgment, and the longing for connection. These are things we still recognize today, even if we now wear jeans instead of silk gowns and sneakers instead of polished leather shoes. A Victorian party may feel distant in time, but the emotions, the awkwardness, the hopes, the little victories and humiliations remain familiar. So I invite you to settle in. As we begin, dim the lights in your own room. Imagine the flicker of candles, the rustle of silk, the clink of glasses. Picture yourself stepping across that threshold, hearing the quiet murmur of conversation rise and fall like waves, feeling the weight of expectation press down as heavily as the corset around your ribs. Tonight we will explore together what it truly meant to survive a Victorian party, not just in the grand halls of history, but in the hearts and minds of the people who lived it. By the end, you may be grateful that your next social gathering comes with far less lace, far fewer rules, and hopefully better drinks. As the butler finally steps aside, and you cross the threshold into the main drawing room, the world you have entered feels at once dazzling and suffocating. The chandeliers glow with hundreds of tiny flames, suspended crystals scattering points of light across the gilded wallpaper. Yet instead of warmth, you feel a strange chill, as though the room itself is alive and watching. Everywhere you look, guests are already positioned like pieces on a grand chessboard, some standing in pairs by the tall windows, others gathered around side tables that gleam with silver trays, and a few perched delicately on sofas, their bodies wrapped in gowns so heavy and elaborate that sitting seems almost an act of heroism. The soundscape is subdued, a murmur of voices pitched low enough to avoid scandal, yet sharp enough to carry meaning. You realize quickly that here, words are never just words. Every phrase carries layers, every pause is deliberate, and every smile is edged like a blade disguised as lace. You try to steady your breath, though the corset compressing your ribs has its own ideas. Each inhalation feels shallow, measured, as if you must negotiate with your own body for the right to exist. A gentleman passes close by, leaving behind a trail of lavender and disapproval, and you are startled to discover that even your shoes are capable of being judged. One sideways glance has already marked them as too provincial, not scandalously wrong, but enough to classify you as someone from the middle tier of society. You tell yourself to remain still because stillness feels safer than motion. If you move, you invite attention. If you invite attention, you risk conversation. And conversation in this room is not about connection, but about survival. The furniture seems designed to confuse and intimidate. Each chair has an unspoken owner, each sofa a hidden history, and to misplace yourself is to risk embarrassment. One settee by the fireplace is occupied by two young men speaking in French with bored precision, their voices like background music, meant to remind everyone that cosmopolitan refinement is never far away. Another seat is half claimed by a lady with a parasol resting like an antenna, angled just so to signal both elegance and exclusion. You drift near a small table, only to realize that even the porcelain cups and silver spoons appear to have an order of precedence you cannot decipher. There is no refuge in objects, only more traps in disguise. The air itself presses down upon you. It is heavy with perfume, competing floral notes of rose, violet, and orange blossom, colliding in a battle no one wins. Beneath the sweetness lies the faint tang of wax, the unmistakable scent of too many candles burning in a space meant for fewer bodies. It is not unpleasant exactly, but it carries with it a subtle warning. This is a room where emotions are hidden, suffocated, and then released in whispers or sudden bursts of nervous laughter. Your skin prickles as you realize that in this world, even the scent is part of the performance, a mask as carefully chosen as any gown or cravat. Then comes the moment you dread, the first approach. A woman glides toward you, her step silent, yet somehow commanding, her smile delicate yet sharpened into a weapon. She introduces herself as Henrietta, and within seconds you understand that conversation here is less about exchange and more about competition. Her eyes flick to your dress, your gloves, the way you hold your cup, and each flick is a silent commentary. She begins with a casual remark about literature, pronouncing the word Cranford with a sigh so weighty, you wonder if it carries centuries of disdain. You attempt to contribute, mentioning Dickens with what you think is enthusiasm, but her expression stiffens, and another lady nearby touches her pearls in reflex. You have made an error, not catastrophic, but enough to mark you as someone who enjoys what is popular, and popularity here is suspicious. You remind yourself to breathe, to smile blandly, to sip tea as though you were a decorative object rather than a participant. The liquid is lukewarm, tasting faintly of leaves long past their prime, yet you hold it like a lifeline. Across the room, another guest tilts his head just enough to murmur something about you. You cannot hear the words, but you choose to believe they are kind, because in this space of veiled critiques and hidden agendas, even the faintest possibility of approval feels like victory. Time stretches strangely in the drawing room. Minutes feel elongated, conversations move like duels in slow motion, and each exchange drains rather than energizes. You catch fragments of talk about politics, about families you barely recognize, about scandals hinted at but never named directly. The rules become clear. Say nothing too plain, reveal nothing too personal, and never descend into subjects considered too earthy. This is not dialogue but theater, and you are expected to play your part without faltering. Meanwhile, the servants move like shadows along the edges of the room. Trays are carried with mechanical grace, glasses refilled without request, and cloaks spirited away without acknowledgement. Their presence is both essential and invisible, for while the guests perform their social rituals above, the true labor of the evening is carried out silently below. You sense that they see more than they ever reveal, and that every whispered triumph or stumble of reputation is noted by the eyes that glide silently past. As the evening continues, you feel the weight of the corset pressing deeper, your spine aching under its discipline, your feet beginning to resent the polished shoes you thought elegant. Yet leaving is not an option. The social contract has you bound as tightly as the laces around your waist. You recall the advice whispered before you arrived. Do not rush. Do not stumble. Do not forget to smile even when despair creeps in. And so you remain an unwilling player in a game you barely understand, waiting for the next movement in this carefully choreographed performance. Already, the first lesson of the Victorian party has revealed itself. Survival here is not about wit alone, nor about beauty or wealth in isolation. It is about balance, about enduring discomfort with a smile, about disguising uncertainty as confidence, and about learning to hear the meaning behind words never spoken. You glance again at the glittering chandeliers, at the lace-draped figures scattered across the room, and you know with certainty that tonight is not about joy, but about endurance. And though you long for the cool air outside, you also recognize that to survive this night is to pass a test that countless others before you have faced. The party has only just begun, and already it feels like a lifetime. You stand frozen with your teacup balanced carefully in your hand, and Henrietta's smile hovers before you like the sharp edge of a knife hidden beneath lace. Every word she utters sounds harmless, even kind, but the undertones are unmistakable. When she asks whether you have been to Bath, it is not curiosity but a test, as though the answer itself will determine whether you are worthy of being remembered or simply brushed aside. You answer cautiously, describing the waters as pleasant, and her approving nod feels like surviving the first round of an invisible duel. Yet you sense this is only the beginning, for in this room conversation is a weapon, and you are already a target. She leans in, lowering her voice to mention the latest novel she has been reading. The way she sighs over the title is heavy with meaning, implying that her taste is refined, superior. Touched with the air of nobility, you attempt to contribute by mentioning a book you know well, a work by Dickens, but the reaction is instantaneous. Her eyes tighten, her fan flickers like the wing of an irritated bird, and across the room, a lady named Agnes instinctively grasps her pearls. It is not scandal you have caused, but something worse. You have marked yourself as ordinary. In this environment, liking what is popular is nearly as shameful as saying nothing at all. You recover quickly, smiling blandly, forcing your expression into something neutral, a mask of polite endurance. You sip the tea again, though it tastes like disappointment in liquid form, as though the leaves themselves have given up hope. Still, the act of sipping grants you a moment of silence, and in silence you find safety. You realize now that here, victory does not belong to the loudest voice but to the most skilled whisper, the one who can imply without ever stating, who can wound without leaving visible marks. The room hums with layers of dialogue. Two gentlemen discuss politics but speak in such cautious phrases that neither truly reveals his opinion, each sentence wrapped in ambiguity like a parcel too delicate to unwrap. A lady comments on the weather with such deliberate tone that you suspect she is actually describing someone's reputation. Every phrase is double-edged, every laugh a performance, every pause a silent calculation. You begin to understand that conversation here is less about meaning and more about survival, a game where the rules are never written down but where everyone knows exactly when you have slipped. Henrietta smiles again, asking whether you have met Lady Caversham. You nod vaguely, unsure, and she tilts her head as though your uncertainty is an answer in itself. She follows with a remark about Lady Caversham's gowns being imported from Paris, her voice laced with approval, so faint it might almost be criticism. You reply with something safely bland, calling the style elegant, and to your surprise she softens, as though you have passed another hidden test. In this world, blandness itself can be a weapon, a shield against the sharper edges of conversation. Yet you cannot relax, for every new sentence feels like a fresh duel. Agnes drifts closer, offering a comment about music. She names a composer with an air of superiority, and you are forced to admit you know little of his work. Her smile widens not in kindness but in quiet triumph, as though she has just claimed a small victory in a war you did not know you were fighting. You try to counter by mentioning another piece, but she frowns, unimpressed. It becomes clear that in this society, knowledge is not measured by breadth, but by belonging to a very specific and exclusive set of names, and the moment you reveal an unfamiliarity, you reveal weakness. All the while, the tea grows colder. The punch bowl sits on its table, guarded by a man in an elaborate cravat, who clearly believes himself the self-appointed master of refreshments. And the air grows thicker with perfume and expectation. You glance around, looking for escape, but there is none. To stand alone is dangerous. To stand too near is intrusive, and to attempt to slip away is unthinkable. You are bound to the group, caught in the invisible net of conversation. Time drags like a slow march. Each word feels like a step deeper into a maze without exit. You smile, nod, respond politely, but beneath the surface your mind races, calculating, adjusting, seeking the safest path. You realize that here, charm is not about wit, but about balance too much, and you seem arrogant, too little, and you disappear. You must be interesting without threatening, agreeable without seeming desperate, graceful without drawing suspicion. It is a performance so delicate that even the best actors might falter. A moment of respite comes when Henrietta, perhaps bored of the sparring, shifts her focus to another guest. You exhale silently, your shoulders relaxing slightly, though the corset ensures relaxation is only partial. For the first time since entering, you allow yourself to observe instead of defend. You notice how every group in the room is engaged in its own version of this duel. In one corner, two ladies laugh too brightly at a joke that was not truly funny. Each laugh louder than the last, as though competing for dominance. Near the fireplace, a gentleman gestures elegantly while speaking, his companion nodding dutifully, though her eyes wander toward another conversation entirely. The entire room is a stage, every person an actor, every moment a scene in a play that will never be written down yet, will be remembered in whispers long after the candles are extinguished. You realize then that this is the essence of the Victorian party, conversation not as connection, but as performance, a constant dance of hidden meanings and subtle rivalries. And though it may seem exhausting, it is also strangely compelling, for within this careful theater lies the truth of the society itself. To understand the way they speak is to understand the way they lived, bound by rules invisible yet unbreakable, sustained by rituals that transformed even small talk into a matter of survival. As you take another sip of lukewarm tea and prepare yourself for the next exchange, you know the night is far from over. There will be games, dances, music, and fainting spells to come, each one a new test, a new performance, another round in this endless duel of appearances. But for now, you have survived the first stage. You have endured the smiles, the sighs, the sharp remarks hidden in silk, and though you are weary already, you remain standing. The party presses on, and you have no choice but to press on with it. No sooner have you begun to recover from the exhausting duel of words than the hostess claps her hands lightly, and a hush spreads across the room like ripples in still water. The time has come, she announces, for entertainment, though you quickly realize that the word does not mean what it does in the modern sense. Entertainment here is not about joy or relaxation, but about spectacle, control, and the carefully disguised art of humiliation. Servants move chairs aside to make space, and guests are gently herded into a circle, some smiling with anticipation, others with resignation, as though they know what is about to unfold and dread it all the same. The first parlor game is presented as something playful, a test of wit and memory. A guest must act out a character from history, while the others attempt to guess. At first it seems innocent enough, until you notice the way wrong answers are met not with laughter, but with raised eyebrows, murmurs, and judgmental glances. One unfortunate man guesses the Earl of Sandwich 3 times in a row, his cheeks turning scarlet under the weight of stares, and the correct answer turns out to be something so obscure Marie Antoinette's hairdresser that the guessing feels less like fun and more like a trap designed to expose ignorance. You laugh politely with the others, but inside you feel a chill, for you understand that these games are never truly about amusement. They are about hierarchy, about reminding each participant exactly where they stand. Next comes a round of riddles, delivered with dramatic flair by a young lady who seems determined to outshine everyone else. Her mother sits nearby, fanning herself with pride, as though each clever line were a personal triumph. The riddles themselves are awkward, stretching on far too long, their answers so unsatisfying that the polite applause feels like a punishment in disguise. You clap along, forcing your expression into something cultured, though inside you wrestle with the same polite despair you see mirrored on the faces around you. In this room, no one dares show boredom, and so the charade continues, a performance of delight masking the truth of exhaustion. Then, inevitably, someone faints. At first you think it must be staged, another game of theatrics, but the sight of Mr. Halberton, a tall man built like a wardrobe, collapsing onto the fainting couch with a groan, proves otherwise. Gasps rise from the crowd, but rather than panic, there is a ripple of excitement, almost joy, as though his collapse has provided the room with a story worth retelling. Guests flock toward him with the urgency of vultures circling a fresh feast, offering smelling salts and murmuring exaggerated concern. Yet beneath the concern lies satisfaction, for fainting in this society is not merely weakness, but a kind of social punctuation, a dramatic event that gives everyone else something to talk about. Stories of fainting quickly emerge, traded like currency. A lady once collapsed upon learning her husband preferred marmalade over jam. A young man reportedly swooned at the sight of a hedgehog. Each tale is delivered with relish, the absurdity disguised as seriousness, and you realize that fainting has become one of the few legitimate ways to escape the suffocating rules of the room. When conversation grows unbearable, when the games become too cruel, one can simply fall gracefully onto a couch and be excused from the battle. You make a mental note of this, though your corset is already so tight that fainting may happen whether you intend it or not. Another game begins, this one involving charades acted out in pairs. The task is simple. Mime a scene while the others guess. Yet simplicity vanishes under the scrutiny of so many watchful eyes. A gentleman performs with too much enthusiasm and is quietly mocked for being undignified. A lady moves too little and is accused of lacking spirit. Each gesture becomes a judgment, each attempt another opportunity for whispers and smirks. When your turn comes, your hands tremble slightly, and you mime as cautiously as possible, neither too bold nor too timid, praying that the answer is guessed quickly. When it is, you exhale with relief, though you know your performance will be dissected in murmured conversations long after. The laughter that fills the room has a strange quality. It is not free, not joyous, but sharpened, controlled, filled with subtle malice. People laugh, not because they are amused, but because they are relieved. The humiliation is not theirs. The games, you realize, are less about participation and more about survival, each round another gauntlet to be endured. There is no winning, only degrees of losing. Through it all, the servants linger in the shadows, their faces carefully neutral, though you cannot help but wonder what they truly think as they witness the spectacle. Do they laugh inwardly at the ridiculousness of it all, or do they pity the guests trapped in silken cages of their own making? One footman catches your eye for a brief moment, and though his expression remains still, you sense a flicker of amusement, as though he knows exactly how absurd this ritual is. By now, your body aches. Your corset presses like iron against your ribs. Your shoes pinch your toes, and your head swims from the perfume that hangs heavy in the air. Yet the night is far from over. The hostess, glowing with satisfaction, declares the games a success and signals for musicians to prepare for dancing. Guests rise, adjusting gowns, smoothing hair, and exchanging glances filled with both dread and anticipation. You realize that what has come so far was merely a prelude, that the true ordeal is about to begin. The games may have tested your wit and composure, but the dance will test your endurance, your grace, and perhaps even your sanity. You glance once more at the fainting couch, half tempted to follow Mr. Halberton's example, but you straighten instead. The next act of the performance awaits, and whether you like it or not, you must play your part. The musicians take their places at the far end of the drawing room, instruments polished to a gleam, bows poised with a kind of restrained tension, and as the first notes drift into the air, you feel a wave of inevitability wash over you. This is the moment you have been dreading. For the dance is not merely a diversion, but another arena of silent competition, a physical test disguised as grace. The hostess beams, clapping lightly, and pairs begin to form with a practiced mixture of eagerness and resignation. You find yourself drawn into the circle, your hand claimed by a gentleman whose smile is too wide, whose eyes sparkle with the unblinking energy of someone who has not truly rested in months. He bows with exaggerated flourish, and before you can protest, you are swept onto the floor. The dance begins slowly, a measured rhythm meant to guide even the uncertain, but almost at once it becomes clear that precision is an illusion. The floor is crowded, skirts sweeping like restless waves, shoes colliding with shoes, elbows brushing in ways both accidental and deliberate. Your partner pulls you forward, then sideways, his enthusiasm untempered by awareness, and you stumble into a chair with barely disguised panic. The chair itself groans in protest, its occupant startled, while you force a smile, pretending this was intentional, a flourish, rather than a mistake. The music continues, relentless, and you are swept once more into motion. Around you, the chaos unfolds with a strange elegance. Couples spin too quickly, colliding into one another with muted apologies. Fans flutter wildly as attempts at composure dissolve, and at least one unfortunate guest finds themselves tangled in the trailing hem of a gown so elaborate it could double as a curtain. A potted plant is nearly toppled by the enthusiastic swing of an arm, rescued at the last moment by a servant who glides in, corrects the disaster, and retreats without a word. The chandeliers overhead tremble faintly, their crystals chiming against one another as though in sympathy with the chaos below. You try to focus on the steps, the measured count of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, but your body resists. The corset squeezes tighter with each turn, your lungs straining to pull in enough air, and your spine aches as though it has filed a formal complaint. Your shoes pinch, your balance wavers, and you wonder how anyone manages to find joy in this ritual. Yet the others continue, their expressions a mix of forced delight and grim determination, as though the entire room has collectively agreed to pretend this is pleasure rather than punishment. A cry of alarm rises near the edge of the circle as a gentleman stumbles, creating a ripple effect that knocks 3 people into a table. Glasses shatter, liquid spreads across the polished floor, and someone gasps, "Gracious heavens," which in this setting translates to a catastrophe has occurred. Yet even this is smoothed over, the music pressing on, the dance continuing as though chaos were simply part of the performance. You are twirled again, too far this time, and nearly collide with another pair. The moment is saved by a quick pivot, though your skirt brushes a candlestand dangerously close, and you imagine, for a brief, horrifying instant, what it would mean to ignite yourself in front of this audience. The musicians grow bolder, the tempo quickens, and the atmosphere shifts from strained elegance to frantic exertion. Sweat beads at your temples, hidden as best as possible beneath carefully arranged hair, but there is no hiding the exhaustion in your limbs. A lady nearby sways too long on one step, nods to her partner with weary resignation, and allows herself to collapse onto a chair with the grace of surrender. Others push on, gasping discreetly, their smiles stretched thin, their laughter brittle. The room is thick with perfume and desperation, the air heavy with the clash of floral waters and human fatigue. Your partner, still grinning, attempts a daring spin that nearly sends both of you into the fireplace. You cling to his arm with forced elegance, forcing your face into a mask of amusement, though inside you are screaming for reprieve. He does not notice, or perhaps he chooses not to, for his own performance depends on appearing tireless, enthusiastic, charming. Around you, couples falter, recover, stumble again, the circle tightening and loosening like a living creature struggling to breathe. The musicians play louder, faster, as though determined to wring every last drop of energy from the room. Finally, mercifully, the piece ends with a crashing final chord, and the applause that follows is ragged, more relief than admiration. Guests clap, not for the music but for survival, for the fact that they are still standing. Some sink into chairs, fanning themselves furiously. Others drift toward the punch bowl as though seeking salvation, and a few simply lean against the walls, their faces pale, their eyes glazed. You find yourself clutching your skirt, gasping for air, your chest tight, your feet screaming in protest. The corset feels less like clothing now and more like an enemy, a vengeful device designed to remind you that beauty here is purchased with pain. But the respite is brief. Another tune begins, softer, slower, drawing couples once more into motion. Groans ripple quietly through the room, quickly disguised as polite murmurs, but everyone obeys. You are drawn back onto the floor, your body protesting, yet your willpower bending to the unspoken rule that refusal is not an option. This time the dance feels heavier, each step dragging, each turn labored, as though the entire room is moving through molasses. Still, no one dares stop. To leave the floor is to draw attention, and attention is dangerous. Better to endure, to move until your body surrenders, to play the part until the candles gutter and the night ends. As you sway and stumble, your mind drifts, imagining the freedom of the servants downstairs, laughing and talking openly, far from the suffocating rules of this performance. You picture the kitchen alive with noise and warmth, the air filled with honest laughter rather than brittle politeness, and the longing stabs at you more sharply than the ache in your ribs. Yet you remain here, in the glittering cage, circling endlessly, caught in the dance that is not a celebration, but a trial. And so the lesson becomes clear once more. The dance, like the conversation and the games before it, is not truly about enjoyment. It is about endurance, about displaying grace under pressure, about proving that you can survive discomfort with a smile. The music continues, and you continue with it, because in this room, survival is the only true victory. The final notes of the dance still linger in the air, when the hostess rises from her chair with a brightness in her eyes that seems almost unnatural, her smile stretched wide, her hands clapping softly in a rhythm that demands attention. The musicians lower their bows. Guests pause mid-step, and suddenly the entire drawing room falls silent, expectant, waiting. You sense that something important is about to happen, though the tension in the air feels less like joy and more like the moment before a storm. She gestures toward a young couple standing near the fireplace, their hands awkwardly intertwined, their faces a mixture of pride, fear, and something like resignation. With a voice pitched high enough to pierce through the murmurs, she announces that this evening shall be remembered for more than music and laughter, for tonight marks a new engagement. The words ripple across the room like a spark thrown onto dry grass. Applause rises instantly, yet it is uneven, some hands clapping eagerly, others with the stiff precision of duty. Smiles appear everywhere, but many are too quick, too polished. Masks worn by guests who had no idea this announcement was coming, and now scramble to display the proper enthusiasm. The bride-to-be lowers her gaze demurely, though her fingers twitch as though betraying her nerves, while the groom nods solemnly, his expression faint, as though he cannot decide whether he is proud, terrified, or simply confused. The hostess beams as if she has orchestrated a triumph, but you notice the cracks beneath her cheer. Her voice quivers slightly, her gestures too grand, and you realize she herself was not fully prepared for this revelation. The engagement has caught even her off guard, and now she works desperately to disguise her unease with exaggerated cheerfulness. Conversations resume almost immediately, louder than before, as though every guest knows instinctively that the safest path is to drown uncertainty beneath a flood of congratulatory noise. Yet the undercurrent is impossible to ignore. Whispers dart like shadows through the room, comments hidden behind fans, exchanged in hurried glances. Who arranged this? Was it planned or forced? Is the match beneficial, scandalous, or both at once? Approval and suspicion blend seamlessly, each guest nodding with visible delight while their eyes betray calculation. To belong to this society is to applaud with your hands while your mind dissects every detail for advantage. You find yourself caught between admiration for the spectacle and discomfort at its cruelty. The couple stands like exhibits on display, their smiles brittle, their futures discussed openly by people who barely know them. A lady nearby declares the match brilliant, her tone so sharp it could cut glass, while another insists it must have been inevitable, though the words drip with disbelief. A gentleman to your left mutters something about dowries and estates, his approval rooted not in affection, but in economics. The air is thick with contradictions, and you wonder whether the young bride feels celebrated or trapped. Meanwhile, the musicians strike up a gentle tune, meant to soften the edges of tension, and couples once more drift onto the floor. The newly engaged pair is ushered to the center, expected to lead the dance, their steps hesitant yet unavoidable. Applause follows them, though behind the applause is a current of judgment. Every movement watched, every mistake catalogued. You sense the weight pressing upon them, the knowledge that tonight they must not only perform as individuals, but as a pair, their union already dissected by dozens of sharp eyes. Around the circle, faces glow with forced delight, but bodies sag with exhaustion. Corsets dig deeper, shoes scrape louder, and perfumes mingle into an overwhelming cloud of sweetness and fatigue. The faint smiles of the guests seem carved rather than lived, their laughter hollow, too sharp, too rehearsed. A woman fans herself furiously, her eyes darting between rivals, while a gentleman raises his glass too high, declaring a toast so vague that it could mean anything. The words to love and to fortune echo awkwardly before dissolving into scattered cheers. As the night wears on, the strain becomes more visible. A guest attempts to begin a story about poetry, only for another to cut in with a tale about family estates, each trying to shift the focus away from the engagement toward their own significance. The hostess hovers near the couple, smiling with such intensity that it borders on desperation, while her husband, seated near the punch bowl, sips quietly, his eyes glazed with weary detachment. The entire room feels like a stage where actors are forgetting their lines, improvising frantically while the audience pretends not to notice. You glance toward the windows, their panes fogged by candle smoke and human breath, and imagine the cool air beyond. How different the world must feel outside, where one can breathe without corset laces, where whispers carry only to the night sky and not into the eager ears of rivals. Yet here you remain, bound by the rules of the evening, unable to step away without consequence. The realization presses upon you with the same weight as the corset. There is no freedom in this room, only performance, and the performance must continue until the final candle gutters. The engaged couple continues their careful steps, their smiles unwavering, though their bodies tremble slightly with fatigue. The music swells, the guests clap politely, and the hostess declares the moment unforgettable. And perhaps it will be, though not for the reasons she imagines. For while the surface gleams with light and applause, beneath it lies the truth that joy here is fragile, fragile as lace stretched too tightly, fragile as a smile held too long, fragile as the faint line between admiration and envy. As you watch, you feel both pity and recognition. This is not merely their performance. It is everyone's. Each guest here knows the pressure of expectation, the weight of appearances, the constant balancing act between sincerity and survival. Tonight, the young couple stands at the center, but tomorrow it may be someone else, perhaps even you. In this world, no one escapes the gaze of society, and no moment is free from judgment. The music ends. The applause rises again, and the couple bows stiffly, their faces flushed with effort. The hostess claps once more, her smile trembling but unbroken, and with that the evening shifts into its next act. Guests drift toward refreshments, others murmur in corners, and the whispers continue, weaving the engagement into the tapestry of gossip that sustains this world. You sip a glass of tepid punch, its sweetness dull, and remind yourself that the night is not yet over. There are still hours to endure, still dances to stumble through, still smiles to force, still judgments to survive. And as the room brightens once more with false cheer, you know that beneath every laugh lies the same truth. This party is less about celebration and more about endurance, and the true challenge has only just begun. The applause for the engagement fades, replaced once more by the endless hum of conversation, and you feel the weight of the evening settling heavier upon your shoulders. Hours have passed, though it is impossible to tell how many, for time inside this room has stretched into something strange and distorted, each minute dragging like an hour, each hour collapsing into a blur of chatter, music, and exhaustion. Your body aches in ways you did not think possible. The corset has become a cage, your lungs reduced to shallow breaths, your spine rigid, your waist constricted, until even standing feels like a punishment. Your feet throb, your temples pulse, and still the night presses on, relentless, as though no one here dares to admit that joy has long since drained away. The air is thick, almost unbreathable, heavy, with perfume layered upon perfume, until the scents clash like soldiers on a battlefield. Lavender fights against rose, violet pushes back against orange blossom, and beneath them all lingers the acrid tang of wax from the hundreds of candles burning overhead. The mixture clings to your throat, stings your eyes, and settles into your hair so deeply that you know you will carry it long after the night is over. Guests fan themselves furiously, their gestures sharp and restless, but the air refuses to move. Trapped in the suffocating embrace of heavy drapes and crowded bodies, you long for a window to open, for the faintest breath of cool night air, but the rules of propriety keep every pane sealed, every guest contained within this perfumed prison. Around you, faces have grown pale, painted smiles beginning to crack. A woman dabs her forehead with a lace handkerchief, her hand trembling slightly, though she insists she is fine. Another sits stiffly in a chair, her fan fluttering faster and faster until it collapses in her grip, the paper tearing with a sound too loud for the silence that follows. A gentleman nearby coughs, apologizes for the noise, and coughs again, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment rather than illness. It becomes clear that no one here is entirely well. yet no one dares to acknowledge it. To admit fatigue is to admit defeat, and defeat is unthinkable in a world built upon appearances. The music resumes, softer now, but even its sweetness feels heavy, a melody stretched too thin over a room that no longer has the strength to dance. A few couples sway mechanically, their movements sluggish, their eyes glazed with exhaustion. Others remain seated, murmuring half-heartedly, their words drifting into silence as though conversation itself has become too much to bear. You watch as a young lady nearby leans too far against the back of her chair, her eyes fluttering closed for a moment before she jerks awake, forcing a smile as though nothing happened. You realize that fainting may not always be theatrical here. Sometimes it is simply the body's last defense against endurance. The powder room becomes a refuge for many, a place where guests slip away under the pretense of retouching their appearance, but in truth seek a moment of release. Behind closed doors, tears are shed, corsets loosened, tempers whispered in sharp tones. Yet when they return, their faces are polished once more, their smiles repaired, their posture perfect. In this world, cracks may appear, but they must always be mended before anyone else can see. You too consider retreating, but the thought of navigating through the maze of judgmental glances toward that temporary sanctuary feels as exhausting as remaining where you are. So you stay, clutching your glass, breathing shallowly, enduring. The gossip never ceases, though its tone has shifted. Earlier, words were sharp, competitive, meant to wound. Now they are slower, heavier, muttered through lips too tired to sharpen their edges. Stories repeat themselves, details blur, laughter fades quickly into sighs. Yet even in exhaustion, the need to maintain the performance persists. A lady insists on describing the new flavor of jam she plans to debut at the next garden party, her voice bright though her eyes are hollow. A gentleman launches into a tedious account of coal futures, his words so dull that even he seems half asleep, but still he speaks, because silence would reveal too much. Your own mind drifts, slipping between attention and distraction. You stare at the chandelier, watching the wax drip slowly, each drop stretching long before falling, like time itself refusing to move. You listen to the rustle of gowns, the faint scrape of shoes against polished wood, the endless murmur of voices that blend into a single indistinct hum. You wonder how long you can continue, how long before your body betrays you with a feint, a stumble, or a sigh too deep to disguise. Yet you push on because everyone else does, because to falter would be to mark yourself as weak, and weakness is a luxury no one here allows. Somewhere in the crowd, a small ripple of laughter rises, brittle but genuine, sparked by someone knocking over a dish of aspic and blaming a ghost. The absurdity breaks the tension for a moment, guests chuckling too loudly, their relief visible, as though any distraction from their own discomfort is welcome. You laugh too, though your voice sounds strange to your own ears, high and hollow, like a fragile thing struggling to survive. The moment passes quickly, swallowed once more by fatigue, but for a brief second it reminds you that beneath all the layers of lace and expectation, these people are human too, clinging to small sparks of humor in the midst of endurance. The night stretches on, and you begin to feel as though you have aged years since stepping through the door. Your body is a collection of complaints, feet blistered, waist aching, shoulders tense, head spinning. Yet your mind remains sharp enough to recognize the truth. This is not a celebration, not even a gathering. It is a ritual of survival, a test of how long one can endure discomfort while smiling, how effectively one can hide misery beneath layers of etiquette. And as you glance around at the weary faces, the trembling hands, the hollow eyes, you realize that everyone else has reached the same conclusion. They endure not because they enjoy, but because they must. At last the hostess rises again, her smile still fixed, though her voice wavers. She suggests a return to the ballroom for one final round of dancing, her words received with groans too quiet to be acknowledged, but too loud to be ignored. Guests rise slowly, adjusting gowns, straightening jackets, repairing masks of composure. Powder is reapplied, fans readied, posture corrected, and with a collective sigh the company prepares to step once more into the circle. You rise as well, though every part of your body protests, your corset digging like iron, your lungs gasping for air, your feet carrying you forward out of sheer will. The party is not yet done, and neither are you. The final summons to the ballroom feels like a sentence rather than an invitation, yet you obey, moving with the others in a weary procession. The music begins once more, slower now, as if even the musicians are too drained to maintain the earlier frenzy. Couples circle the floor, their steps heavy, their smiles faint and brittle, each movement a shadow of what it was hours earlier. You join reluctantly, your body stiff, your feet leaden, but the rhythm pulls you forward in spite of yourself. Around you, gowns sway like tired sails, faces gleam with a sheen of fatigue hidden beneath powder, and every gesture speaks not of joy, but of endurance. This is no longer a dance, but a final trial, a test of who can last until the very end. The chandeliers flicker as the candles burn low, their wax pooling thickly at the bases, the air growing hazier with smoke and scent. The room feels smaller now, compressed by hours of tension, laughter forced, tears hidden, words sharpened and dulled in equal measure. You feel as though you have been trapped here for years, bound to this endless ritual, yet still you move, step after step, because stopping is not permitted. The music ends at last, followed by applause that is ragged, half-hearted, a collective sigh of relief disguised as cheer. Guests bow, curtsy, smile, and then scatter quickly, each one eager to pretend they are not exhausted, though their bodies betray them. Slowly, the night begins to unravel. Servants appear with cloaks and shawls, arranging them carefully over tired shoulders, their movements smooth but brisk, for they too are eager for the end. Guests murmur their goodbyes, voices thick with politeness, though their eyes plead for release. Carriages are summoned, the sound of wheels crunching over gravel outside, bringing with it the first true sign of escape. You wait your turn, watching as others are escorted out, their faces a blend of dignity and weariness, until at last your name is called, and your cloak is placed upon your shoulders. The moment you step outside, the world transforms. The cool night air rushes into your lungs, shocking and glorious after the heavy perfume and wax of the drawing room. The moon hangs low, casting silver light across the gravel path, and the faint hum of distant laughter drifts from the servants' quarters, freer and more genuine than anything you heard inside. You pause, breathing deeply, savoring the relief, feeling the weight of the evening fall away little by little. The corset still presses against your ribs, your feet still ache, but the air itself feels like liberation. For the first time in hours, you can breathe without fear. You can stand without judgment. You can exist without performance. The carriage door opens, and you climb inside, sinking into the cushions with a groan you cannot quite suppress. The wheels begin to turn, carrying you away from the glowing windows of the mansion. And as the distance grows, so too does your sense of freedom. The house recedes into the night, its lights fading until they are nothing but a memory, and you realize that what you survived was not merely a party but a trial, a test of endurance disguised as elegance. You laugh softly to yourself, the sound strange but honest, a laugh born not of amusement but of sheer relief. As the road stretches ahead, your mind turns over the lessons of the evening. You think of the endless conversations, sharp and subtle, the duels fought with words wrapped in politeness. You remember the games, the laughter that was never quite real, the humiliation that lurked beneath the surface. You recall the dances, the exhaustion hidden behind forced smiles, the chaos disguised as grace. And above all, you recall the engagement, that fragile moment of supposed joy that revealed more fear than happiness, more calculation than love. These memories swirl together, painting a picture not of delight, but of survival. You begin to understand that Victorian parties were never truly about celebration. They were about maintaining the fragile balance of a society obsessed with appearances, where every guest was both actor and audience, where every smile was a mask, every word a performance, every fainting spell an escape. They were endurance tests, challenges to see who could remain composed the longest, who could hide their discomfort most effectively, who could leave with their reputation intact. And in enduring them, you see reflected something timeless, the same pressures that, in different forms, exist even today. Because is it really so different now? We may no longer wear corsets or bow beneath chandeliers, but we still feel the weight of expectation when we step into rooms filled with people. We still measure ourselves against others, still struggle to balance honesty with performance, still endure situations that exhaust rather than enliven us. The costumes have changed, the settings modernized, but the essence remains: the need to belong, the fear of judgment, the desire to survive socially unscathed. The carriage rolls onward, and you lean back, eyes closing for a moment, the rhythm of wheels on stone soothing in its simplicity. You think of the guests left behind, their forced smiles, their weary eyes, and you wonder how many of them, once home, will collapse into bed with the same relief you now feel. How many will question whether it was worth it, whether the hours of discomfort and pretense served any true purpose. And yet you know that next week another party will be held, another room filled with perfume and whispers, another night endured. The cycle continues, because in that society it must. For you, though, tonight has brought clarity. The lesson is not simply about history, but about humanity. That sometimes the greatest test is not in grand battles or heroic acts, but in the quiet endurance of expectation, in the ability to smile when you wish to sigh, to stand when you long to rest, to pretend when you crave truth. And perhaps the real triumph lies not in the performance itself, but in recognizing its absurdity, in stepping outside afterward and laughing at the spectacle, in choosing to remember not the pain, but the humanity hidden beneath it. The night air is cool against your face, the stars sharp above, and as the mansion disappears fully from sight, you feel a deep calm settle within you. You have survived the party, endured its trials, carried its weight, and now, at last, you are free. The firelight, the whispers, the chandeliers, they are behind you now. Ahead lies rest, peace, and the simple comfort of being yourself once more. And as you close your eyes, lulled by the steady rhythm of the road, with certainty that in the Victorian era, parties were never just parties. They were tests of endurance, performances of survival, and reminders of how fragile appearances truly are. And so, dear friends, we reach the end of tonight's journey. Together, we have stepped through the heavy doors of a Victorian mansion, endured the long hours of subtle battles fought with words, witnessed the games that were more about hierarchy than joy, circled endlessly in dances that tested not just grace but sheer endurance, and watched as announcements and whispers shaped the very mood of the evening. We have breathed the suffocating perfume, felt the tightening of corsets, and heard the faint sighs of exhaustion that every guest tried so hard to hide. More than a party, what we experienced was a reflection of an entire society, one that lived by rules written and unwritten, a world where appearances mattered above comfort, and where survival often meant smiling through fatigue. As you sit here now, perhaps with your own cup of tea or coffee, you might be reflecting on how different and yet how familiar it all feels, because though the fashions, the music, and the etiquette of the Victorian age have long since faded, the emotions remain recognizable. The pressure to belong, the fear of being judged, the longing to be noticed, but not exposed. These are not confined to the past. They live quietly in our present, too, whenever we find ourselves in rooms where we feel out of place, or at gatherings where we pretend to be comfortable even when we are not. And perhaps that is the true gift of looking back. By seeing ourselves in the struggles of another age, we recognize that humanity, in all its flaws and endurance, has always been the same. If you enjoyed this journey, if you found yourself smiling at the absurdity, nodding at the truth, or simply grateful that your evenings today are free from chandeliers and endless fainting spells, I would love for you to show your support. You can do that in simple ways, by giving this video a like, by sharing it with friends who enjoy history told in a more human voice, and by subscribing to the channel so you do not miss the next adventure we take together. These small actions mean so much, because they allow me to keep creating stories like this, weaving the past into narratives that feel alive and relatable. And if you have thoughts of your own, perhaps reflections on what part of the Victorian party struck you the most, or maybe even memories of modern events that felt just as overwhelming, I would be delighted to hear from you in the comments. This channel is not just about me telling stories. It is about us sharing insights, building connections, and finding those little sparks of recognition that remind us how closely past and present are linked. Looking ahead, there are many more journeys waiting. We will travel to other corners of history, slip into other moments where society shaped behavior, and explore stories that deserve to be remembered not only for their facts but for their humanity. Some nights we will laugh at the absurdity of customs long gone. Other nights we will pause to reflect on lessons still relevant today. But always we will step into these stories together, with curiosity as our guide. So if tonight's exploration left you intrigued, make sure to stay with me, because there is so much more to come. Before we part, take a moment to breathe deeply, just as those weary Victorian guests must have done, when they finally stepped into the cool night air after hours of endurance. Let yourself feel that same relief, that same sense of release, knowing that you too have survived the party. And remember, History may be heavy with etiquette and rules, but it is also filled with moments of humor, humanity, and lessons that still speak to us today. Thank you, truly, for spending this time with me. Your presence here matters. I look forward to seeing you again soon, in another story, another journey, another window into the past. Until then, rest well, take care of yourself, and know that more tales are waiting just around the corner. Don't forget to like, to share, and to subscribe so you will be the first to join me when the next chapter begins. And now, as the candles burn low and the night grows quiet, I wish you peace and good dreams. Until next time.